Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in us the fire of your love. Amen. Well, many years ago, I was speaking with my spiritual director who worked with me for about 20 years and dropped me just before seminary because she was getting older and in ill health. But I remember calling her this one day because we'd spent a lot of time talking about wilderness. And I said, I used to think that a lot of our life would be okay and we'd have these periods of wilderness that would be kind of harder or darker or not knowing what was going on and just vague. But, we'd be okay again. But I said, lately it seems to me most of life is a wilderness. And every now and then we get an oasis out of the wilderness. And I was speaking to her on the phone, but I could hear her smile when she answered, "Welcome to Christianity." We live in wilderness times. And right now we are in a wilderness like I have not seen in my lifetime. I don't know about you guys, but this is something on a whole new level. We've had some other health crises and stuff, but this one seems to have a serious wallop, and maybe some have seen worse than this, but this is pretty bad right now. And I think we're being prudent. Like, this is the last time we'll gather in person for a while, and I still have to figure out how we're going to continue to worship while we're on this ban. But I think it was just out of an abundance of caution that the bishop said, let's forego face-to-face worship for the time being until they get this virus in check. Italy did not move on it fast enough, and right now they're having hard conversations about who will they be able to save, because they don't have enough ICU beds for the number of people that are sick there. And talk about a wilderness. How would you want to have to be the hospital administrators making those decisions? Do you use age cutoffs? There's been some conversations about that. I don't know what they're going to do. I know we need to be in prayer for one another. I know that the more I guess grow in my faith and the deeper I've gotten, it's like the wildernesses are the norm. And yet we have these times where we gather, where we meet at this table that feed us and strengthen us and fulfill us. I had the joy of a couple trips to the Holy Land, and one of them, we went to the church that's built up over Jacob's Well. It's still there. I had a drink out of Jacob's Well. I mean, it's just amazing to me to think that 2,000 years later, that well is still there with fresh water that people can drink from it. And of course, this gospel, this woman that encounters Jesus, she would go at odd times when there wouldn't be a crowd because she was, I guess, rejected. I guess if you have 5 husbands, or 4 husbands and 1 extra guy, I mean, we don't really know exactly, but Jesus knew. She said, "You know everything I've ever done." So I think she kind of avoided the crowd. But when she realized who Jesus was and he said, "You won't have to come to this well anymore," she ran to tell people the good news. She left her bucket at the well. She didn't take it with her because she had such confidence in what he said to her. We can have confidence that in this wilderness, God is with us. That Old Testament reading we just had, Exodus, oh my goodness. The people of Israel that Moses was leading through the wilderness for 40 years were a bunch of ingrates. It did not matter how God provided for them. They were a whiny little lot. They got manna every day and they got sick of manna. So then they asked for quail. They asked for something else and God sent quail. And then they got sick of eating meat. They were always complaining. And in today's scene, they were thirsty. So they wanted water. So God told Moses to go and strike your staff, and they'll have water. And they did. But in the midst of it all, the Israelites were quarreling and testing the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" As we go through this current crisis, we might ask ourselves, is the Lord among us or not? I think he is. I think like any wilderness, we have to look a little harder. If you go up to the top of the mountains out in the Rockies, up above the timberline, there's, in the frozen tundra, growing these little tiny plants and even little flowering plants that have taken like 100 years to grow. So they're really picky about, like, don't go off the trail and step on these plants because they're so fragile. But yet still they grow in this rocky, barren-looking place. They grow. We too can grow. In the rocky and barren places of our lives, in the wildernesses of our lives, in the times when we don't know what tomorrow will bring. I mean, we're starting to have conversation. Will we be up and running for Holy Week? Will we be able to celebrate Easter together? Or will we be doing some online version? Or will this crisis have settled down enough that we can gather again in face-to-face worship? We just don't know. And that's the thing about the wilderness. We don't know. The wilderness is a time where you just wander around not knowing. The Israelites had no idea. They wandered for 40 years. And I found out later, as I was studying about the piece of real estate they wandered around, it was a piece of land they could have covered in 8 days. So they were literally going around in circles, and I'm sure questioning their leader all the time. And like I said, complaining and unhappy. They missed the melons and the leeks and the cucumbers. Like I said, they were kind of a whiny little lot, but I'm not sure I'm much better than them. I'm not sure how I'll take not being able to be with people. I had a communion visit set up this week with Susan Tumeyer, one of our older parishioners, and she called and said, my doctor said I shouldn't have anybody in the house. So even the people that can't come, I might not even be able to come to them out of an overabundance of caution to keep them well. It's an unusual time that we're in. I've never seen anything quite like this. And then I think, wow, this is something I'd love to ask my dad about. Dad, did you ever have a time? And I can't. That's another wilderness. I'm in this wilderness of grief where life has changed. I can't just pick up the phone and say, hey, Dad, what about this? He's been my go-to priest for a very long time. Before I was a priest, he was my go-to priest. Even though he was my dad, I still had a lot of respect for the work that he did. So we find ourselves trying to figure out a way to go through this desert and this wilderness in a meaningful way. I was looking at a Knowing Jesus study Bible, and the commentary here about this little trip through the desert with the Israelites. It says, at first glance, the Israelites' attitude seemed puzzling. After God had given them bread, they complained about not having meat. After God supplied quail to supplement their diet, they complained about lack of drinking water. Time and again, they forgot God's promise to care for them. If truth be told, we're not so different. The pressing needs in our own lives often loom so large that we fail to see beyond or around them. The tyranny of the urgent results in repeated memory lapses. We all endure desert experiences, times during which we muster up little hope and find ourselves doubting that God will keep the promises. But when we feel desperate and we can learn from the Israelites, we can take time to thank God for what He has already done and trust in Him to fulfill our immediate and long-term needs through His Son, Jesus. And this is the thing I think that I really found about wildernesses, and that was another thing Kay would say to me when I was in a difficult period. She would be like, well, think about other difficult times that you've had and how God has brought you through them. We have all had difficult times in our lives. God has brought us through many things, or we wouldn't be here. I think of the many different situations in my life that were difficult. As much as I hated them on some level, I also grew to appreciate them because of what I learned from them. I think one of the gifts of the wilderness is to learn our dependence on God. 40 years it took the Israelites to figure out that God was really as faithful as God said God was. But they got it. And in the end, they got to the promised land. And God began a new people with them in a new place. It brought them to a land of plenty. And so they went. So as we go through, I'm looking at our world right now and reading stories online. I mean, it's crazy out there. People are like hoarding things, buying sanitizer. There is one guy somewhere in the middle states that has 17,000 bottles of hand sanitizer in his garage because he heard about that was going to be the next thing, and also he's got the Clorox wipes and everything else. And he was going to sell them on Amazon and make a quick turnaround. Well, Amazon caught on to him and shut him down because he was price gouging. So now he has a garage full of hand sanitizer and disinfectant wipes and everything else that are of no use to anybody and are out of the hands of people that could really use them. I hope he'll turn around and donate them someplace. I really do. I don't know what's going to become of him. He thought he had a good scheme, and maybe he did for a while. And I think that's something that human nature has been doing for a long time, supply and demand, and people ratchet up the price if they know the demand is great. But in a time when our nation's health is at stake, our very lives are at stake, it seemed awfully selfish and rude of him to take resources out of people's hands. And so now it kind of makes me laugh that he's sitting with this garage full of stuff he can't use. And like I said, I hope he will figure out something good to do with this. How will we be? I don't know about you. I already know one person that has this coronavirus. He's out in New Jersey. He's a doctor that I got to be friends with when I did a plunge at seminary. They sent us into a 2-week immersion with a parish, and he was a lovely guy. And I got to know him a little better online or through texting and messaging and stuff when his wife died. You know, I shared some messages with him, and he has since remarried. He's a doctor. He's on the front lines, and now he has the coronavirus. So I pray that Doc recovers and that they get this thing checked before a lot more people get sick. I don't know if he'll make it or not. We don't know if any of our loved ones are going to fall sick. This is landing everywhere. It's in Florida. It's in New Jersey. There was a case here right in Kane County. We have a case up in McHenry. This virus is here. This wilderness is here. And we are in the thick of it. So what do we do in the wilderness? Do we go through like the Israelites? Are we going to be a whiny little lot and complain that our lives are suddenly inconvenienced? Or are we going to look to God with some faith and hope? Are we going to pray for the people that need our prayers? Are we going to figure out ways to be community with all the technology that we have in this day and age? Are we going to call each other? Check in on the vulnerable people that we can't see right now because their doctors don't want outside people. We can still send notes. We can call. We can touch base. Let's not disband our community. Let's figure out ways to hunker down and be together even if we're not face to face. Because community is an invaluable thing. Jesus, when he came into this world, he surrounded himself with his little ragtag band of apostles. And then he had his friends that he hung out with, Mary and Martha and Lazarus and his family and who knows how many other people. He took times in the wilderness where he set apart time to pray, and we should do that too. And in this wilderness, I hope you will spend some time in prayer and seeking what God might be trying to teach us. So one of the things I wonder is, as we go through this, will we remember how faithful God is? Just because we're going through a bad time, that doesn't mean God is off the throne or that God has gone to sleep. You know, the psalmist reminds us that God never slumbers. He is on this and will give us the resources we need to get through this. This weekend, our church lost the beautiful, wonderful Bishop Barbara Harris, who was the first woman bishop in the Anglican Communion. And a wise woman, and one of the quotes I found for her is quite fitting for such a time as this. She said, "The God behind you is greater than the problem in front of you." I think that is the thing. Indeed, we need to remember, God is among us. Consider all the ways that God has been faithful to you in the past. And look for all the ways you still see God among us now. How can we remind others, indeed, that God is among us? And how do we live as people of hope in a time when a lot of people are running around screaming the sky is falling? You know, I have to keep turning the news off. It just is one bad thing after another. I mean, I check in periodically because I don't want to be completely ignorant about what's happening in the world. And so I I have my little Jesus Always book that I enjoy a lot, and it's written in God's voice to us. And just as a reminder of what we're going through right now, to remember God's faithfulness. The words from yesterday were just perfect. I rejoice over you with singing. Open wide your heart, mind, and spirit to receive my richest blessings, because you are my blood-bought child. My love for you flows continuously from the throne of grace. Look up and receive all that I have for you. Listen and hear me singing songs of joy because of my great delight in you. You can approach me boldly with confidence, trusting that you are indeed the one I love. The world teaches you that love is conditional, based on performance, appearance, and status. Even though you don't believe this lie, the constant onslaught of this message of the media can penetrate your thinking. That is why it's so important to spend time focusing on me, soaking in my presence, absorbing my word. Setting aside time to be alone with me is countercultural, so this practice requires discipline and determination. However, it is well worth the effort. Living close to me brightens your life immeasurably. With me is the fountain of life. In my light, you see light. And there, one of the verses is from Zephaniah. The Lord your God is with you. He is mighty to save. He will take great delight in you. He will quiet you with his love. He will rejoice over you with singing. May we spend time in this wilderness that we're in, and in our kind of imposed social distancing that's being required of us to check this. May we remember that we are not alone, that God is with us, that we are still here as a community loving and caring for each other. And let's be creative with ways that we can continue to do that until we can be together again. Amen.